Welcome again to another edition of Big Ideas in App Architecture. I am thrilled today to be joined by my good friend Yolanda Davis, who is Principal Software Engineer at Cloudera, focusing on the Cloudera Dataflow Operations team. She's the team lead for the Dataflow Operations team. I had to look at my notes to get this correct because I didn't want to mess up the long title. But Yolanda, welcome to the show. Very, very glad to have you on.
Thank you so much, Tim.
Oh, you're quite welcome. So, in previous episodes, the way we usually like to get these started is just to, to learn a little bit about you, about your background, about how you got in to this crazy business of leading teams, building applications. You and I've known each other for a while, so I have a little bit of history, but I would love for you to share kind of with the audience, a little bit of the Yolanda Davis story, because it is so interesting.
Yeah, well, I was one of those kids in the 80s that really tinkered with computers. Actually, my mom, she noticed, okay, I love Barbie, but also I was dissecting Barbie. I was taking apart Barbie's cars. And so my mother, being a social worker, she's very aware and observes a lot of things with kids. And she said, okay, my daughter's a little different. Let me see what I can get her into. And she saw, she didn't know at the time that the computer itself was going out. It was being discontinued, but it was at an affordable price. Have you ever heard of the Atom computer? It was sold at like an equivalent of a Best Buy. I think it was called Best back then. And she brought that computer home and I was just all in. I didn't know there was such a thing as being a computer programmer, but I knew I wanted to figure out how to make this thing work. And I was about 9 or 10 years old at the time. Fast forward to when I was going into college, I actually went as a mechanical engineer, spent a good 2.5 years hating it. And that's no shade to anyone who is a mechanical engineer. But I always thought that engineers, that eventually they would write programs. So that's why I got into it. And a friend of mine who, at least in college, we were in the same scholarship program. He looked at me and was like, you hate engineering. And you talk about computers all the time. Why don't you become a computer science major? And I was like, wait a minute, what? That's a thing, because this is 1996. I didn't know that you can actually go to school for that. And if I didn't say it already, this is at the University of Maryland, College Park. I'm a proud Terp. And that changed my life. I talked to him that afternoon. I made a call to the dean of that school. I got transferred the next day and the rest is history. So I have been an active developer since 1998 with, I think, for looking back on it, I've done a lot of different things. Tim, even before you and I met, gosh, it's been almost 14 years, Tim, since we worked together. But before then, I had spent some time working for the state at the University of Maryland while I was getting my first master's degree. I switched and worked during the .com era, I was working for one of those type of companies doing a bit of application engineering support type deal. I spent some time as a subcontractor with the government. I've done things with it's been a while, but several different agencies there. I was a consultant for many years. So within that 6-year time frame, right before you and I met, I did everything from working with small companies, startups, you name it. But the single thread that has been consistent for me in my career up until the time you and I met is I loved programming, but I really loved working with data. And so a large part looking back on things was I was either writing reporting tools or systems that would integrate data. Way back when I would work with MQ series in order to do, basic kind of enterprise messaging and that sort of thing. Ordering systems. And when you and I met, when you interviewed me, it was around, I think the first project you had me do was visualizing data. So I always had that knack. And I tie it very closely to one of my favorite classes in undergrad, which was database. And may he rest in peace, Dr. Jack Minker. He was renowned in like that area. And that was the first class when it just clicked for me. And so I just took that everywhere I went. But I didn't want to be like a DBA. So I found positions and opportunities where data was always central to that. So once you and I started working together, I always talk to you about kind of, I'm like this new area, big data, at that time, this new area, data science. I wanted to get all in because I always saw it as like the next phase. We have always had this history of how to best manage data, how to make it perform well in terms of when you need to search and query things. And of course, there's always been technologies like OLAP. I don't know if anybody really uses that as much, but at least the traditional sense, where we wanted to create these warehouses in order to do some analytics on it, understand like current state and maybe trends. But now with that introduction of big data, it got into what I was always interested in, is like, how can we, forecast or figure out and predict what's going to happen? And we also, you and I, we watch the technology change and shift, right? So once you and I parted ways, but for a moment, I spent some time, but for a moment.
Just a moment.
Yeah, I spent some time. I went to Concur, that was later bought by SAP, because I wanted to kind of chase that data journey for myself. Yeah. I really wanted to get into data science. I was still kind of taking a class here or there. Mm-hmm. And then finally, here you come again, grabbing me up again for an opportunity at Hortonworks where, it was like if we last this long, that'll be good enough. But, and I really weighed that opportunity because I was at a place where I saw a lot of potential in how Concur and use, from the travel perspective and that reporting perspective. But then there was a difference between that and working with the people that are creating the software and the technology and getting into that space. And so my thinking then was, I'm going to take a huge risk because I didn't know any of the stack at that time. I knew how to, write applications, but not, when it comes to distributed platforms and everything that supported, it was all net new with a very trying project, right? But we figured it out. And so my first phase at Hortonworks was, as you're aware, on that professional side. And I spent 9 months as working on that PS side, but then the kind of balance there was, okay, I'm understanding the stack a bit more, but do I really want to get on the road? But then while at Hortonworks, there was a little company that everybody was talking about internally called Anyara, who was led by Joseph Witt. And next thing you know, Hortonworks buys Anyara, which they have a lot of specialists who were part of the committers of the Apache NiFi project. And while I was still in professional services, I thought to myself, are there opportunities for me to land in engineering where I could contribute? And then now that this new NiFi team was formed, they were looking for people to work on front end or back end work. And I'm like, okay, I've done both. I love data. Apache NiFi helps to solve the problems of how people will obtain data from various sources and route them with some level of reliability with the interactive command and control, which is kind of key there, And I said, oh, this is a good opportunity. And so I've been kind of hanging out with Joe Witt and the rest of his much larger team than when we started ever since, even though now, since Hortonworks merged with what we now know as Cloudera. And it'll be 8 years in June.
It's an amazing journey. And I think, I know for a fact that the Cloudera team and certainly Joe Witt's team is incredibly fortunate to have you. I mean, I've said this to you before many times. I mean, you're one of the most gifted all around engineers I think I've ever met. I mean, I don't think there's ever a problem we couldn't kind of put in front of you. It didn't really matter what the space was, the technology was. It's like, if Yolanda is on this problem, it's going to get solved. And so I know they're very lucky to have you.
I appreciate that, but I also, the strengths on this team has been outstanding. I started off even going from PS into more of a senior role and working my way up. But the strength that I think I was able to exercise is the ability to collaborate well. So there's a huge difference when you have such a strong team and solid leadership. That makes all the difference in the world, I think.
So I know you and I both know a lot about these two, about, Apache NiFi and certainly Cloudera. I was a Hortonworks employee myself for a long time, but maybe just for the audience who may not be as well educated and versed on these technologies, can we maybe give us just kind of a brief overview of what, I know it came from Anyara, but kind of what is the problem space? What is Apache NiFi out there doing? What is it trying to solve? And then maybe talk a little bit about, kind of how it fits maybe into the overall larger kind of Cloudera product offering. Because I know they've got that's evolved quite a bit over the years as well.
Absolutely. Well, I'll start really how NiFi was formed. So NiFi, the project itself kind of came out of the NSA. If you can imagine, they're in the getting data business, right? For various reasons. But those who started that project, they were trying to solve this problem of they were writing code to all the time in order to create jobs or whatever streams of data to get data from, whether it's a database or some other external resource, and land it to someplace else with some level of reliability. And some people who were involved, they would always have to go to a particular person or go to a particular developer. And so Joe and folks basically said, well, what happens if we were to make it a lot easier for people to design how they want to transfer data from one place to the next, no matter what the source or the sink will be. And to make it very simple, have this interactive command and control, how it's called, or just a user interface to do that work. And it's a little bit different from if you've ever worked with some older school reporting systems where, or ETL jobs. I know we've worked with some in the past where you have something where you design the job, the workflow first, and then you kind of submit that job and then it executes. Well, NiFi is different. It's interactive command and control. So you can design where you want data coming from, how you want it to land, the level of reliability or retries, all within that a platform or within that UI. And then you can say, I want to run it immediately without kind of submitting some job. And that's what kind of distinguishes it from like traditional ETL.
Yeah, there's like very much like a real-time aspect to it. So like I can, I get data flowing through the system and I can kind of drag these widgets around. At least this is my recollection from a couple years back. Like, drag widgets around. I can, kind of add forks and joins to this stream of data. And I can do that all in real time as opposed to, in effect, defining some job, compiling it, pushing off to server. I've got like this interface where I can watch this data kind of move back and forth, and I have complete control in real time on kind of where that all lands.
Yes. And that is what is a huge distinguisher between NiFi and a lot of other kind of similar products where you have to have like a programmer or developer. And so what this does is it takes it out of that maybe traditional data engineering team. And now, like, for example, we haven't gotten to it yet when it comes to the data science stuff I do on the side. I can put it in the hands of a data scientist that, where they just know simply how they want to set up their data, where they want their data to land. And so it basically broadens your user base and simplifies these things that you find yourself creating over and over again. I think that was another thing too. Like, I'm doing these same activities over and over again, same sources, same sinks. And NiFi kind of brings all of that together along with some of the guarantees and reliabilities that we would expect, ensuring that when you send a message, it will be received and how you can set up those guarantees for delivery. So that's it at like a very, very high level.
Yeah, it's really cool tech. I mean, I was using it years ago and thought, I was really blown away by it. And I know it has to have evolved and grown even since then. And I would imagine too, and you would know better than I at this point. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of other people kind of claiming to do the same thing, but I think the interesting thing about NiFi, at least from my perspective, is kind of the first. I mean, don't you think it was kind of like the first in the space that was really, really targeting this, like, hey, I'm going to make this super easy, to kind of organize, the flow of data in my system.
Yeah, it was definitely the first. And, early on, it might have been 50 different, what we call like processors or different sources and things. Now you have hundreds that the community has contributed to help go from, any types of points of sources and things that you can possibly imagine. And, you can't also think you can also expand to say it's not just about sources and, data at rest, so to speak. It's also if you wanted to kick off another job or integrate it with other kind of downstream, more, streaming applications, machine learning APIs, there's a whole broad possibilities with NiFi. And to answer the other side of the question, like how does it fit in the Cloudera ecosystem? Well, really, you see it almost like the beginning of the story, right? When it comes to the hybrid cloud or the hybrid platform that we talk about, whether or not you're on a cloud or you're in private space, how can you connect the dots? Like we are in the middle of that. So it's not just a story of land everything all in Cloudera. We know that's not the whole truth, right? People will have different aspects or use different providers for different things. And so NiFi it helps to serve that bridge to send data to all different types of places, especially within the cloud. So I think that's why it's a huge part of our broader platform's story.
Yeah, and I think what we're finding, certainly, even though I left Hortonworks, I'm still very much in the data game. I mean, Cockroach being an operational distributed database, I mean, even it needs kind of, solutions like NiFi, because, data is a little bit everywhere now, like as you kind of, hinted at. I mean, there is data in relational or operational databases, there's data in analytics, there's data in, streaming technologies, and it's kind of out at the edge in centralized places in the cloud. I mean, and moving data between those places, keeping a handle on it, understanding where it's going, rerouting it if necessary to other places as new technologies emerge. These aren't simple problems to solve. And I think especially, when you get to data at the scale that Cloudera is operating, Hortonworks was operating, or, massive amounts of data, you need to have this like really efficient kind of command and control. And you've mentioned resilience and reliability a lot, and it can't go down. You can't lose data. Data can't like end up on the floor. This can be really, really important stuff.
Absolutely. And also to add to the story, we're talking about NiFi and this interactive command and control, but that's not the only part of the NiFi story, right? So there is MiNiFi, which is also part of the project.
I forgot about
we
that.
talked about a smaller, lightweight form factor of how do we capture data that is out there on various devices.
Yeah.
And even now we have the support of NiFi as a function. I think we call it internally, but basically how we can run NiFi within the Lambda space or the serverless space. Yeah, really. So there's a lot of different form factors that NiFi comes in. And some of those things are even more actualized within our CDF product, which, we actually offer. Of course, NiFi itself is available as an open source. Yep. However, within Cloudera, our cloud offering is Cloudera Dataflow, which is powered by Apache NiFi.
Got it. Okay,
and
that makes sense.
So we support almost like a platform as a service aspect of delivering NiFi, and it allows people to deploy their flows. Actually, we have something now, a more recent release has what's called the Flow Designer, so you can design and deploy your flow within the cloud-based environment.
And without having to operate your own infrastructure.
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge thing. I mean, it's part of, hence my operations lead. My team is charged with how NiFi operates in the cloud and some of the scaling and, observation or monitoring that we do. I
was going to ask you to maybe go into a little bit of kind of what your current role is, because, as you alluded to at the beginning, you've been at Cloudera for 8 years. You started in professional services with me and have gone on to much bigger and better things. So tell me a little bit about the current role, because I know you're doing kind of some more operation stuff, maybe less engineering than you had originally been, but I don't want to describe it for you. I want you to tell me exactly kind of what the role looks like today.
Oh, sure. So I would say my role looks like it's more of setting a vision for and supporting and mentoring my team in terms of how well we can operate NiFi in the cloud. And what I mean by that is it is not just ensuring that it performs well for flows, but it also, what does that look like, right? How well does it scale in order to meet whatever amount of load? And what does the scale look like, right? Whether it's horizontal or vertical based scaling. And I know everybody talks about observability. I just want to get monitorability in place. So we're always reviewing like what metrics should we expose, which is one of the people on my team, they're doing now, they're exposing more metrics such that we can not only take advantage and see what's going on from if something is going wrong perspective, but also I have a huge interest in being able to forecast the need. So there are certain hooks there that already exist. So for example, for those or anyone who works with Kubernetes, there's something called a horizontal pod autoscaler, for example, that will allow you to by default configure based off of CPU. But we have a lot more richer metrics to it from the application itself. So we're setting things up so that we can scale on things such as, if the internal flow gets backed up for any particular reason, being able to scale such that we can handle the load that it needs to handle. Or and then once we get to that point, then it's more about, okay, how can we start recommending the footprint based on the load? And so all of those things it's been a journey, at least in my view, of ensuring we have the right infrastructure. So I know you love to ask this question, Tim, what are we using behind the scenes? So we use heavily and rely heavily on tools like Prometheus in order to collect our metrics. And it's not there for like a long-lived, history of metrics. It's really more of kind of like a short-term collector for long-term goals, right? So we use it in order to collect the metrics and then alert on issues, but also we react based on those alerts. So it's not just showing to the user. We might put things in a particular state based on an alert. And as I mentioned, we're going to be scaling based on, other things that metrics find. So a lot of the work that myself and my team does is part of that story of how well NiFi behaves from a scaling perspective and being able to project that. And then the other side too, and I will not, this is the area I say I am not the expert, but I did a great job as well as my managers in interviewing folks who their background were creating applications that basically support NiFi within the cloud. So, which is based in Golang. I had, some of the Golang, but I made sure some folks on my team were the experts. They've been doing this for several years in creating operators that know how to extend the Kubernetes API such that we can declare we want a NiFi running. And I as a kind of journey for me is just understanding programming as it relates to Kubernetes. And I'll say that in that regard, I have learned just as much from my team and the experts on my team who support us.
It's tough, isn't it? Don't you think? I mean,
I'm not a young person anymore.
We just did another podcast and we were kind of closing up on this idea of Kubernetes, and it's come up in various things. I mean, I struggle with it. I struggle with the terminology, the API, because at Cockroach we've dabbled in building various operators and want to extend it and do all this other stuff, and so my team and I have at various points had to dig deep into Kubernetes. I fancy myself a reasonably intelligent person, and I sometimes read about this stuff. I'm like, what the heck are they talking about here? I don't.
Yeah, I mean, you're going into a declarative mindset. I think that's the kind of at like the lowest level. And the way that I, at least once, when it started resonating with me, which is when I understood, databases are declarative too. So like SQL as a language is a declarative language. We're not writing when you run that explain plan and see everything that's doing behind the scenes. And then also understanding that internally it's like a state machine, right? It's always trying to maintain state. And so the code is structured that way. And I think for you and I, that's like a game changer. It's a mind shift.
It has been tough for me, and to the point where like I'm just like, okay, I'm going to let somebody else like really get into these details.
And so I've been like, I say, I'm probably now only in recent time, and if my team watches this, they would laugh because they know, have I really kind of been in that reconciliation world, in the operator. But at the same time, I look at it at the overall vision. And so as long as, because there's certain fundamental things that I know it should do. Like I need to ensure that persistence is there, right? I need to ensure that the networking considerations. So like when they would raise anything up to me, it's just, you still go to the foundational things that make sense, because once you figure out how to spin the thing up, right, with your operator, there's still certain things that it just should do. And so a lot of times when they would talk to me, it's about those things. I'm like, okay, are we dealing with mutual TLS when we talk between one component and the other,
Yeah,
it's those sort of things.
I just always walk away feeling like, it doesn't have to be this complex. They could have just been named a little differently, and it would have made a lot more sense.
But we don't have to know, at this stage of the game, like I'm okay with not knowing everything, but what I do need to know is at the end of the day, does it help to solve the problems that we want to solve? And when it comes to the world of Kubernetes, in terms of the level of reliability that the platform offers, or the framework offers, and it comes to some of the self-healing traits that we know we want to take advantage of, right? Especially when it comes to how well we want to perform. We just kind of have to roll with the punches. And honestly, I'm not mad at it internally operating as like a state machine. I mean, at the end of the day, its job is to always ensure that it's at a particular state. That, how it does it is just, it gets interesting. And then Golang is just, Go is just the best language to it. I got a certification in it, but I did, but it's like, it's a whole other,
I ordered,
other ball game.
so Cockroach DB is written in Go.
Yeah, I remember.
And so I was like, I'm going to order the book. I'm going to read the book. Amazon shipped me 2 for some reason. So I have 2 copies of the Golang book. I haven't gotten through either one of them. Not that I would read them both, but because of the same book, that would be silly. But they sit like in different corners of the office. And I think, well, if I'm over here, maybe one day I'll be inspired to progress. I don't know. As a longtime Java person, maybe I'm just getting too old for it. I don't know. I want to learn it. I think I should learn it. I think I can learn it, but I haven't done it yet. And Kubernetes is the one thing that's kind of pushed me in that direction, given some of the operator work, because all the operators are written in Go. So,
yeah, the classes, mind you, what I took was more on the Coursera. It's like I took that certification, but the style in which I use for those type of things is different from the style and the frameworks, right? There's certain things where I would look at Go and I'm like, I'm probably not going to use this or need this. And even in the, the code base that we have, I'm like, we never use that stuff. But I'm sure there are certain applications of it where it absolutely, makes sense, especially some of the event things that you can do with Golang. But sometimes I do put it on the level of Scala where, when I did Scala, I've done it a couple of different stints and I'm like, what? Because Scala is super powerful. I have a better appreciation for it now when I've seen it used in the context of data science in some of the libraries. But it's so powerful, you can really get yourself messed up. And that's where I'm like, I don't like getting in trouble with languages. And I can see myself getting in trouble with that one pretty easily.
So I want to go back to, because you're working really closely with observability. Observability is such a hot topic right now. And I know it is for us. And just kind of curious what your overall thoughts on observability and its important to kind of products and development, or maybe Cloudera's overall philosophy. I just know at Cockroach, I don't think there is a customer we've had or a prospect we've talked to that isn't, curious about our observability story. I think it's like, 5-10 years ago, we weren't asking these questions. I don't remember us ever worrying too terribly much about observability, and maybe it's longer ago than that. But, now it seems like it's one of the hottest areas. I mean, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, personal hot take, I think observability is huge because we're more in the cloud and it's just harder to see things in the cloud. And just to kind of at least level set or how the observability I work with different from like data observability, right? So I'm focused more on, watching our components, what we use operationally, which is different from watching data and the history or the provenance associated with data. So, but I personally think because it's so hard to see things in the cloud and interoperability. And when we talk about observability, I hone in more on the ability to monitor first, right? Which is kind of like I think is a subset of that, because, and the things that I know I've read, which I personally agree, is there is a subset of things that you want to monitor, which is different from having access to things of, such that, or making your application such that it can be observed, the metrics that you might not know about and the things that you might need to discover that you're not aware of. And that's an interesting balance in the cloud because eventually that data has to go somewhere and it costs money. So for us, so when I think of the CDF story from it, observe and how we can assure that our product is working well, it's ensuring that, okay, how well is it running? Well, first off, is it working? I know that seems like, well, isn't that just like the bare bones? Yeah, but you'd be surprised because there's a difference. Parts of the application might think, oh yeah, that's up, that's running, but it's throwing exceptions and you don't know it, right? So how do you monitor that? How do you even know? So just finding new ways or additional metrics exposed just to get that information. And so that is kind of at least the story as I'm working with my team to improve how well we monitor things. And then not only seeing what's happening right now, but then the analysis, right? So when I want to get these metrics, even if things aren't going, are fine, how can I collect that? Where is it going to go long term? thankfully, we take our own medicine. So we do use Cloudera Data Warehouse internally, which is our kind of data warehouse product. And I know that I can send some of that data internally such that I can start analyzing, for some customers, that's the growth plan. But overall, at least I want us to get to a place where we can anticipate what is going to happen, and not only anticipate, apply immediate remediation. That is what my opinion is the real story is, because you can watch it all you want. What are you going to do about it? And how are you going to eliminate a human from doing the action? And that is really my vision for how we operate, is really for us not to have to call support, or a customer not have to. We should get to a place where that is rare, and either empower the customer to take an action, or better than that, automate that action. Whether it's through a scaling, whether it's through an auto tune kind of, we've had some recommendation based on how you're running. We're going to change the footprint. And, the pie in the sky is, how can we adjust or tune your flow or make recommendations? That's really where the superpowers come in.
Yeah. I think I was sharing with you when we met earlier. I mean, meeting with Andy Pavlo, who's a professor of databaseology at Carnegie Mellon, he's, over the last couple of years, started this company called OtterTune, which is looking at, using AI to monitor databases to determine which knobs to tune, to gain efficiency or performance. I think this idea of this combination of observability plus AI to not just alert you that something's wrong, but like to take decisive action, on your behalf to either, make an improvement or, eliminate failure or, anything. I think this is, to me, where I think the future's headed. Is,
and not even failure, cost mitigation, right?
Oh,
so now we're looking at, you're not just scaling in order to handle for performance, but you're also scaling in order to fit within a reasonable cost point. And so I think it has tons of potential.
Well, and I think, cost, we talk about this a lot, and I'm sure, y'all are talking about this a lot at Cloudera. I mean, we're talking about data, right? Data is the lifeblood of most organizations today. And, if data becomes unavailable, if it's corrupt, if, even if it's not down, but, the response time for the tools that rely on this data is so slow that it might as well be unavailable. I mean, these things have real cost to businesses. If I've built an infrastructure on Cockroach and Cockroach can't respond, that's a huge problem. If I've built an infrastructure that relies on NiFi to move data and NiFi goes down, this is a huge problem. It has real cost associated with it. And I think that's maybe I don't know if this is true, but, just reflecting back on my own career, I don't think we thought about it that much 20 years ago. Maybe I didn't. It was just like, these things are going to work and I'm not worried about it. But boy, a lot more online today, I think.
Well, I think too, if just looking back, at least, beyond when you and I were working in the educational space, the type of software we were building, the risk wasn't as high. Right. And a lot of times we would work for a place and they were the consumers of that software, but, wherever we worked. But when you get into a space where you're creating software where others may use some things which could be mission critical, and to say it that way, the federal government is also a customer of ours. Right. So there might be things that we don't know about where reliability could be a huge risk and it's just not a monetary loss. I think it's not that those concerns didn't exist. I think now the scale of those concerns is a lot broader.
I think so. I think it's very true. The scale and just how important data is to more and more organizations. It really is like the lifeblood. And I think, again, failing to keep it consistent, keep it alive, keep it available, a huge impact.
Yeah, I agree.
So I wanted to switch gears on you just a little bit.
Okay.
Well, not too terribly much, but you recently went back to school.
Yes. At a certain age, I laugh now. I'm thankful it's done for now.
But I'm curious just a little bit about. I mean, you and I've talked about it a bit here and there, but just for the listeners. I mean, what were you going back to do, and kind of what was that experience like? Because I know there are a lot of people who get to our age and are kind of like, man, I wish I could. I don't want to say hit the reset button, but like that, you're always learning, always should be learning. So maybe just walk us through kind of what that was like, where you went, what you did, what you learned, and what ultimately you want to do with it.
Yeah. So, I mean, to kind of pick up where I left off, at least on my data interest story. So while at now Cloudera, even though I'm within the operations team, I thought I would have an opportunity to, as I work with my team and as I help develop these products or this product, I thought I'd have an opportunity to really understand a bit more about data science and machine learning. And I just didn't have a structured way to do that. I'm the type of learner where I'm going to have a class, which, as you know, I was always taking some sort of course. Like I always took some course with someone somewhere. And I've done that for as long as I can remember, especially since college. And so I got to a point where, at least in my career within Hortonworks / Cloudera, I was a manager at the time before I switched to be more of a IC / principal, where I was working with NiFi, but in a different vein. And I was like, I'm not getting any closer to my goals that I came here with, which was to learn more about data science. And so I decided to go back to school. I evaluated several programs, and I specifically landed at the Harvard Extension School, which is like the remote program for Harvard, under the Harvard University system. And I chose Harvard because they allow you to try it before you buy it. So basically their model was you could take, I think it's still like this, 2 classes. And if you do well, that's part of your acceptance. And so I had already gotten into a known school, with a great reputation, but I wanted to be able to try the program. And what was great about it, it was extremely rigorous. I was questioning my decisions, but I made it, and I did well in it, and I wanted more. And so it was one of the best decisions I feel like I made. And it took me 3 years, but I graduated, all of the degrees that the extension school, issues is, ALM, or it's a master's of liberal arts in extension studies of whatever subject. For my subject is data science. And it allowed me to take classes, some of which who were joint offered under Harvard University, and then some were under the extension program where people in industry, because that to me is the most valuable. So I took everything from early kind of data science, like just putting a process to the work. It is completely different from software development as a process. I think of it more of being like a scientist in the lab. You're going to have a hypothesis. Sometimes the data that you have is going to allow you to achieve that hypothesis. Sometimes it's going to disprove it. So it's more like that kind of mode. And then I took a lot of different things under data science, which I feel is like a hodgepodge of, I know it's a hodgepodge of different areas. So I had taken an AI course. I've taken, deep learning courses. I've taken, deep learning for NLP. And I found that where I lean towards the most, or the things that excite me the most, is less about some of the things that you see now with deepfakes. So less about, computer vision or generative based models. But I do have predictive analytics based things. I'm very interested in taking like regular structured data and just getting insights there. But I'm also interested in natural language. I had a awesome professor, Chris Tanner. He was a lecturer at Harvard. I think he does stuff at either Stanford or MIT. I'm sorry, Chris, if you're watching this, but he's because I know he's moved to a couple of different universities in the Cambridge area, and I learned a ton from his class in particular. But to answer your question, like where I see myself going is I'm signing myself forward to get into it. I'm going to try to apply to either a PhD based program or doctorate program. Yeah, I am learning that there is still a huge space for businesses to really understand how to apply this research and not jump on like the next hot thing. There's a lot of considerations around ethics in AI and bias that can be introduced that I think is very important, and almost paramount for businesses to understand and incorporate into their process. I think there's opportunity to grow within that space and contribute in that space. And another thing, actually, you don't know about this, one of the last things that I did at Harvard was working with a small nonprofit called WildTrack. They actually do work with detecting endangered species through tracking their footprints using machine learning and computer vision. And so I've continuing my work with them on the side as if don't have enough things going on right now. So, so another part of my interest is helping nonprofits get on board with this technology because they're doing really cool things in that space when it comes to eco diversity and just applying machine learning and artificial intelligence. So yeah, and then in my day to day, like I was telling you, us forecasting scale, like that's how that's the road. That's always been the road for the last 2 years, and now we have a lot of the pieces are in play to leverage, like how can we use time series based data in order to inform how we scale, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's a lot of different applications, but I'm crazy. My hope is next year sometime I'll be shaking my head in front of some some professor at the ripe age of 48.
It's amazing to me. I mean, I think it's so impressive that you were able to do that and wanted to do that. It's so important to keep learning. And there are so many fascinating things out there in the world.
It's amazing. I mean, the amount that this field has changed, even within the last 5 years, Tim.
Well,
and so to be prepared, like my thing is to not as much beat up on the technology, but to have a strong foundation for it. But that's no different from when you and I started, right?
Yeah,
and got our degrees.
No, I agree. But I think, you kind of mentioned it, like kind of this, ethics and some of this AI and biases. I mean, I think there's a real kind of potential growing problem there. I mean, it's,
it's not just growing, it is here.
Yeah. It's pretty fascinating stuff. And I think, these are disconnected things, but, certainly things like ChatGPT, which you hear about more and more, is, I think, but one extension of kind of this growing dependence on artificial intelligence, machine learning. And, and those are all driven by data sets that may or may not carry with them, kind of
embedded biases,
biases. And there's not a lot of governance there right now.
It's not a lot. They're definitely not like a broad governance. There are definitely people who are on the ground kind of fighting the good fight. Timnit Gebru, she has her organization that's focused on this work and studies there. She actually, ex-Googler, created her own kind of research foundation to do research within this area. Joy Bulamwini, she's also somebody who put this on the forefront in terms of facial recognition. And so there are, and those are only two people that I could just off the top, who are not only vocal, but are challenging from a policy standpoint, putting checks in place. But for now, the best thing for businesses is to be forward thinking. If they are creating models, do you have model cards? If you're creating model cards, which basically describe, here's what this model does. Here's the risk of using this model. Here are the data sets that were applied. And even those who contribute data sets, having, I think it's called data sheets, or data cards that basically describe what's the risk of using this data. But on top of that, too, there's certain techniques around debiasing that could be employed. That was one of the things that I learned that I didn't know about going into the Harvard program, that was such a thing. I always thought, well, it's a factor of the data that you use. But there are also techniques that people are using to actually debias models. And I think the moral of the story is, I think what will be important moving forward is kind of the grassroots effort, businesses willing to follow these particular standards so they won't get burned, quite frankly. So it won't come back to them like it has for several of even the bigger players out there.
Yeah. And I think, and it's it's important when we're going through these kind of very, I think, transformational periods, certainly related to technology, that you do kind of take a step back and say, yes, it's important to move really, really fast. And I think a lot of people are doing that. But, with all of these innovations, some good can come of it, but some harm can come from it too, as well. And I think, it's important, I think, to kind of be very mindful, as companies are adopting these new technologies and that they're not recreating some of the challenges of the past,
I think it's being mindful, but also make it part of your process. right? You can think, oh yeah, I should do, but part of your process should be, if I'm creating a model, understanding its usage, understanding the risk, build that in as part of kind of whatever auditing or part of your development process or your model development process. If that, in that way, just like our software, lifecycle or how your development process, it becomes a built-in thing that is checked for, as opposed to, something that maybe somebody might add and somebody might not.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important. Well, I know we're kind of running up on the top of the hour, and I don't want to take too much of your valuable time. So maybe as we kind of bring it in for a close here, are there, maybe it's two questions and maybe it's one answer, maybe it's two different answers, but, just curious as you look forward to this year. Obviously you've accomplished a lot, with certainly the degree from Harvard and all the things y'all are doing at Cloudera. But what are some things that you're looking forward to kind of in the next, 12 to 18 months, whether it's you personally, whether it's, it's at Cloudera? I mean, what are some of those exciting things on the horizon for you?
Oh, well, I would say for me, I'll speak to, at least within Cloudera, within CDF, some of the things that I'm excited about. My team, we're now getting to a space where we can do predictive analytics within the ecosystem. So even though it's not quite what someone sees when they interact with it, it's more of having a greater reliability and be able to project scale. That, to me, in the next 12 to 18 months is paramount. It will hit the nose on what, at least for me in my role, I've envisioned since the end of 2020 of terms of possibilities of what we could do. And then outside of that, for me personally, I am super intrigued, even though it's a lot of checks and balances. But when it comes to like ChatGPT, there's a lot of things that people are doing that I'm like, man, if this was around, I would have done it. I'll give you a perfect example. Victor Divya, he is a researcher at Microsoft. He actually ex-Cloudera, and he recently came out with something that allows you to automatically do exploratory data analysis. And anybody who does data science, they know, like, one of our early steps is you want to analyze the data set that you have and generate your visualizations and give some summaries on things. Well, I think he created something that built on top of a large language model to generate. Like, you tell it, hey, I want you to create this EDA, you give it a data set and it spits it out. He just published a paper on that. And I was like, I want to try these things. Yes. So like there's like all these different applications and things that I would love to get into. So my hope is by 12 to 18 months, I could figure out how to either tap in to that technology or even empower, like, even if it's the day-to-day work. And I do have some internal thinkings for NiFi, but I'm going to keep that one to myself of how that could apply. But yeah, we've seen some interesting things that large language models can do in that space. So that might be a thing as well. You never know.
No, I agree. There's some fascinating. I mean, I was just at the Gartner conference in Orlando a couple weeks ago, and the guy in the booth behind us he was using kind of a ChatGPT style interface to just query databases, and it was just like, SQL's a very natural kind of way of communicating with data, with databases, but, just spelling out in English language, what do I want from the data? And then it returning kind of in narrative form, as well as a table of the data, as well as the SQL query used to execute it. I thought it was incredibly fascinating.
Yeah, it's very cool. And kind of like, at least the study that I did empowers me with, okay, now I know how that works. And so like the growth path for me is, okay, how do you take research like what Victor has done and others and apply it to, like, various things that maybe is, net new, or how can we build upon it? So yeah, it's very cool stuff seen in action.
Well, Yolanda, as always, I really enjoyed our chat today. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. Hopefully we have you again sometime in the near future, but this was a blast talking to you, as it always is.
Likewise, Tim. It's so good to see you.